فكلي واشربي وقري عينا فإما ترين من البشر أحدا فقولي إني نذرت للرحمن صوما.
Hello everyone, Assalamu alaikum. Thanks for joining the Islamic Mary podcast. So today we're going to speak about the actual birth of Jesus and the glad tidings that he brings. As we discussed before, Maryam is not introduced initially as the mother of Jesus or Isa, but rather she's introduced as a daughter. She also grows up and she becomes in the caretaking of Zakariyya. And then she begins to teach spiritual lessons to those around her. And then she becomes a mother. So the Quran has this really fascinating development of her character, where her mom didn't necessarily want her. She wanted a male to live and work in the temple. But she was born, honored, raised, and became a spiritual being, someone who had her own miracles before actually Jesus or Isa was born. So for today, then let's transition to verse 345 or in Surah Ali Imran, where the angel said, Mary, God gives you news of a word from him, whose name will be Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, who will be honor in this world and the next, who will be one of those brought near to God. He will speak to people in his infancy and in his adulthood. He will be one of the righteous. So the Arabic says, إِذْ قَالَتْ الْمَلَائِكَةُ يَا مَرْيَمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُبَشِّرُكِ بِكَلِمَاتٍ مِّنْهُ اسمه المسيح عيسى ابن مريم وجيها في الدنيا والآخرة ومن المقربين. What is unique here is that the Quran announces the birth of Isa, of Jesus. And in this birth, we see that the Quran is speaking directly to Maryam again. As we discussed, there is this idea of ka or ki, and ki being directly to a woman. So it says, Yubashiru ki, that we're giving you a glad tiding of a word. And then announcing the name. The name is Isa or Jesus, or he is going to be called the son of Maryam, which is unique in that most people in the Arab context are known through their father. But Isa is known through his mother, representing a maternal link. And he is someone who is going to be honored in this world and hereafter, and is one that's the most closest to God. And then after that, there is a mention of what he's going to do, of his future miracles. As we discussed, Maryam has her own miracles. She got certain fruits and provisions outside of the regular seasons. But now Jesus, Isa, will grow up and he will have miracles of his own. One of them is that he will يُكَلِّمُ النَّاسَ فِي الْمَهْدِ وَالْكَهْلَةِ, that he will speak to people in his infancy. When he's a young child, he will be able to converse with people. And in his adulthood, وَمِنَ الصَّالِحِينَ, and he will be among the righteous. So Maryam is given this remarkable bashara, or glad news. And this glad tiding is connected to other prophetic and Quranic figures. So one of the things I've become really interested in is how are these biblical and Quranic figures connected to one another? And how does the Quran intentionally or even unintentionally draw comparisons or parallels between them? And there's an author named Layla Ozgar Hassan, and she's written a lot about Quranic stories and echoes that there may be certain words in a verse that actually are similar to another Quranic figure in another verse, showing the coherence of the Quran and how each figure draws and builds upon one another. Now here in this verse, we see that there is a parallel to the earlier Zakariyya or Zakariyya. So similar words are used to talk about Zakariyya, that are used to talk about Maryam. So if we go just a little bit earlier in this chapter to verse 38, it states, "There and Zakariyya prayed to his Lord, saying, Lord, from your grace grant me virtuous offspring. You hear every prayer." The angels called out to him while he stood praying in the sanctuary, "God gives you news of John," or Yahya, confirming a word from God. "He will be noble and chaste, a prophet, one of the righteous." And in the Arabic, we see a similar call, that the malaika, or the angels, say, فَنَادَتْهُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ وَهُوَ قَائِمٌ يُصَلِّي فِي الْمِحْرَابِ. So he was standing in the mihrab, the prayer niche, and the sanctuary, and then the angels called out to him, and they say, "Inna Allah yubashiruka biyahya." So almost identical phrasing is used to discuss Maryam. So in the Maryam story and the Maryam verse, it says, "Inna Allah yubashiruki." So God has given you the glad tiding, where in this particular verse it says yubashiruka, that we're giving you the glad tiding to Zakariyya. And then the verse continues and says, "Bi Yahya," that we're giving you who? Yahya. And once again, just like in the previous verse, announcing that of Jesus, of Isa, now we see that the Qur'an is also explicitly naming that of Yahya. And he's someone who's going to affirm the word, that he is going to be a Sayyid, a great leader, and he's going to be chaste and be a prophet, min as-salihin. Once again, a very fascinating description of righteousness, that he's going to be a righteous prophet and person. So the Quran here is making a parallel. And there's been a lot of focus in literature about parallelism and how figures have similar structures. So what we see is that Zakariyya, he makes a call. He wants a child, and then he's given a child, and that child is Zakariyya. He is given the glad tidings, this tabshir of this child, and this child is described as someone being righteous and someone who is going to fulfill God's will. And this almost exact same structure is used with Maryam, that Maryam is told by the angels that she will also have a child, that she will have a glad tiding. Her child will be named Isa, or Jesus, and he is someone who is going to be close to God and can have his own miracles and be among the righteous. Now, there's an important difference between them. So if we look at Zakariyya, even though both of them are given a child, both of the children are considered to be prophets and among the righteous, Zakariyya, in fact, actually asked for a child. And we'll see how this is similar to Abraham and Ibrahim later on, where Maryam doesn't ask for a child. She doesn't want necessarily to have a son or a daughter, but God announces this. And in many ways, this is similar to other prophetic and Quranic figures like Musa or Moses, who goes and he doesn't asking for prophecy, but he is told that he will be a prophet in front of the burning bush. Now, we also see that there's a connection between Abraham. So within the same chapter, there's a connection between Maryam and Zakariyya. And then if we look at the Quran as a whole, we see that the word bishara or tabshir is used throughout. We see this in talking about the clouds and rain. Rain is considered to be a bishara. You see that in many verses that speak about the hereafter and paradise and hellfire. Those who are given the good news of paradise are told that they'll be given the good news through this verb of yubashir, that they'll be given the good news of paradise. So children are considered to be a good news, a glad tiding, both that of sons and daughters. And particularly here, we see that that the prophetic and Quranic figures are given the good news of a prophet, of a child, to their particular parents. Now, if we look later in the Quran, in verse 3799, we see another prayer. And we see that Abraham is someone we've talked about in this podcast. And much of my work has been on Abrahamic figures and questions about which son will be sacrificed and his patriarchal legacy. And he, similar to Zakariyya, he makes a prayer when he is old. So he says, وَقَالَ إِنِّي ذَاهِبٌ إِلَىٰ رَبِّي سَيَهْدِينِ. So he says, I will go to my Lord, he is sure to guide me. Lord, grant me a righteous son. So we gave him the good news that he will have a patient son. So just like Zakariyya, Ibrahim calls out to his Lord, and he's saying, I'm leaving. And there's different interpretations of this idea of dhahib, that is he going, he's leaving his particular locale, he's migrating. But a dominant one is that he's getting old. He realizes that he will return to God, and he's asking for guidance. And part of this guidance is that he wants to have a righteous son. And he says, Rabbi habli min as-salihin. Oh God, give me or bestow upon me those who are righteous. And here the verb heb is used and is connected to one of the names of God, of Wahhab, that God is the bestower. He gives people good news and he bestows upon them different things. Among them is the idea of children. And just like in the previous verses with Zakariyya or that of Maryam, that the child that he wants is min as-salihin, that he wants a righteous child. Right? He doesn't want just any child. He doesn't just want progeny. He wants someone who's going to represent him and his legacy. And just how John or Yahya or Isa is talked about as min as-salihin, among the righteous, in the same way Ibrahim is asking for a righteous child. The next verse says, وَفَبَشَّرْنَاهُ بِغُلَامٍ حَلِيمٍ. So we gave him the glad tidings of a forbearing or patient child. And the same verb is used, bashara, yubashir. And once again, you see this connection that when any prophetic or Quranic figure is given the good news or given a child, then the verb is used of bashara, that this is a glad tidings, just like the rain and coming in the middle of a drought, or if someone is given the good news of paradise, in the same way they are given the good news of a righteous child. Now, to conclude, these verses are significant because they connect these different figures together. That Maryam is often connected to Jesus, Isa. But in the Quran, we see a connection between her and Zakariyya. Zakariyya is also given a child, and Zakariyya is given the good news of John, of Yahya, and that good news will eventually lead to the good news of Jesus, of Isa. We also see the connection between Maryam and Isa, that in the Quran, the divine voice speaks and says that this child is going to be Isa, and that child is Isa ibn Maryam, that he's going to be called Jesus, the son of Mary. And that's different than Zakariyya. That Zakariyya is told that he will be given a child, but that child is just named Yahya. Right? He's not going to be named Yahya, the son of Zakariyya. And this speaks, I believe, to the intimate connection between Maryam and Isa, how Maryam is praised and extolled in the Quran. And at the same time, it also affirms the mortality or the humanity of Jesus, of Isa. That Isa in the Quran is seen to be someone who is a prophet, a human prophet, a mortal prophet, and that is different than other conceptions that may see him as divine. We also see this theme of intimacy continue, that here the same intimate language is used to talk to Maryam, that the angels, they say to her, Ya Maryam, inna Allaha yubashiruki. So once again, they're speaking directly to her. They're not speaking through a dream. They're not sending a male messenger or prophet. They're not even sending Zakariyya and saying, Zakariyya, please tell Maryam that she's going to have Isa. Rather, they're actually speaking to her, her hopes, her dreams, and telling her that she's going to have a child. Now, does she initially ask for that or call for that like Ibrahim or that of Zakariyya? No, she doesn't. But as we'll see, she accepts this divine decree like other prophetic or Quranic figures like Musa. And we see this idea of glad tidings, that children in the Quran are seen as glad tidings, that you are supposed to be happy, excited, ecstatic even when your children are born. And this is true for not only male prophets or male children, but that of females as well. And as we discussed in our previous episode about Maryam and as a daughter, that the Qur'an says that when the daughter is born as a glad tiding, that she's a glad tiding, something people should be happy about. Many of the Arabs became sad and gloomy, and they began to speak out against such a tragedy in their mind. And this also leads to an important point about parenting. And as I discussed in my initial episode, I introduced myself as a father of 3 girls. And as a father and as a parent, there is this constant theme of starting your parenting and your parenthood from the beginning. That if the mother and the father are involved in the labor and the pregnancy and in the conception of the child, and they actually work in the nursing period of taking care of that child, and they see that child as a blessing and as a glad tiding from the very beginning, then they're even more committed to taking care of that child as it grows older and eventually begins to serve their parents. So to conclude, I want to thank you to listen to the Islamic Mary podcast. You can always visit my website, dryunusmirza.com. There you see my research and my blogs. And I invite you to join my listserv, where I'm going to update everyone on my forthcoming book, which should come out in 2025, as well as opportunities where we can engage with one another and ideas and thoughts about this podcast. Thanks once again, and take care.